UFC 316 was headlined by two bantamweight championship fights. For the men, it was the rematch between Merab Dvalishvili and Sean O'Malley, and for the women, it was Julianna Pena versus Kayla Harrison, a rematch and a grudge match, and boy, in the aftermath, do we have a whole hell of a lot to discuss, and we're going to start in the main event of the evening, where Merab Dvalishvili is still the UFC bantamweight champion of the world, as he has successfully defended his title for the second time, and he goes to 2-0 against the former champion, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Prior to UFC 316, there were just 8 fighters in the organization's history that had ever won 13 consecutive bouts in a row or more, and now, following UFC 316, you can make that 9, as Merab Dvalishvili continues to extend his resume, extend his legacy, and build upon it fight by fight, his 13th consecutive victory in a row, joining the likes of Max Holloway, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Demetrius Johnson, John Jones, George St. Pierre, Kamaru Usman, Islam Makhachev, and my favorite fighter of all time, Anderson the Spider Silva. And at just 34 years old, Merab is still in his prime years and still continuing to get better and better fight by fight. Just see the performance that he just had this past Saturday against Sean O'Malley in the rematch, where not only did he beat him once again, but this time he left no stone unturned. He made sure that there were no judges involved in the decision. He takes it out of their hands, places it in his own, and submits Sean O'Malley in round number 3 with what is something pretty rare to see these days, a north-south choke. And I know I talked about it on Friday, but I'm going to reiterate it here in the aftermath. Over this 13-fight win streak, you have to pinpoint where things really started to take the next step for Merab, and it started in September of 2021, where he made that all-time classic comeback against Marlon Moraes, the former title challenger, and ended up getting the finish there. That was the most recent finish on Merab's resume prior to UFC 316, but don't let that fool you. Look at the other names that he has beaten by pretty convincing decision, and pretty much all of them. Jose Aldo, the featherweight legend and bantamweight title challenger, Petr Yan, a former bantamweight champion, Henry Cejudo, a former Olympic gold medalist and 2-weight UFC world champion, Sean O'Malley, now ×2 former champion, and Umar Nurmagomedov to kickstart his 2025 at UFC 311, who heading into that fight was undefeated and the favorite to dethrone Merab. At this point, he's lapping the division quite literally, and Merab Dvalishvili is arguably the greatest fighter on planet Earth today, and he's undoubtedly the greatest bantamweight on the planet today, and we'll talk more about that later on today, because there was someone else that maybe had that argument that in the aftermath absolutely does not. And in this rematch, he landed, I believe, 5 or 6 takedowns. He outstruck Sean O'Malley on the feet, landing some pretty massive right hooks in a few different circumstances and combinations, and then managed to pull off a very rare submission over Sean O'Malley and become the first man to ever submit him in his career. And one of the biggest discussions and talking points heading into the weekend was the circumstance and question of, is Merab Dvalishvili the greatest bantamweight of all time? And I feel like in the aftermath of this one, now with 2 title defenses, with 13 consecutive wins in a row, it's pretty hard to deny him at this point as not being better than his friend and teammate Aljamain Sterling, and not being better than the legend and Hall of Famer that is Dominic Cruz. And with the names attached to the resume that we just discussed, I think it's at this point becoming unquestionable that he is the greatest bantamweight of all time. But if he isn't in your eyes, because in my eyes after this, he absolutely is, what will it take for him to become the bantamweight GOAT in your opinion? And the closer he gets to bantamweight GOAT status, the closer this man gets to the greatest of all time, no matter the division status. And I think it's pretty clear what the next steps will be for Merab, who the next title challenger will be for his bantamweight throne, and that's because he was in the audience. He was in the front row, and he had plenty to say to Merab in the aftermath of the fight in the backstage area. That is none other than Corey the Sandman Sandhagen.
I really like your jokes.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna have a good one.
Now, to be fair, there's also another name that could easily be a number one contender in my opinion, and that's Petr Yan, the former champion. However, Petr Yan got dominated just a couple of years ago by Merab Dvalishvili, whereas Corey Sandhagen is a fresh matchup. Two men that have never fought one another, and that's what I believe gives him the up in this conversation. Corey has won 4 of his last 5 fights, with the only loss coming to the former title challenger Umar Nurmagomedov. As a matter of fact, that was a number one contender fight in hindsight because Umar would go on to fight Merab at UFC 311. But Corey has bounced back from that August 2024 loss to the undefeated at that point Umar by beating Deiveson Figueiredo just a few weeks ago, May 3rd in Des Moines, Iowa. And not only did he beat him, not only did he dominate the fight for the 9 minutes and 8 seconds that we got to see it, but he got the finish. And he's 33 years old, right in his prime, and one of the more versatile fighters in the bantamweight division and in all of the UFC. And I think he definitely poses some unique threats and challenges to the champion Merab Dvalishvili, and I absolutely think that that is the next fight to happen for the Bantamweight Championship of the world, and if Merab has anything to say about it, it will be sooner rather than later. And you have to think that Corey Sandhagen would be on that same timeline, being that he didn't take much damage against Deiveson Figueiredo, being that he only fought once in 2024 after coming back from his tricep injury at UFC Nashville in late 2023. And right now, Corey is wanting to capitalize on his name value and fandom that he is continuing to build week by week with his social media game. He's looking to up his name value and get his name in the mouths of more of the MMA community. And the same can be said for Merab Dvalishvili, as he makes some of the funniest skits that you'll see through any active fighters, and he's beaten one of the biggest names in the UFC in 2 of his last 3 victories. This is an electric fight for the Bantamweight Championship of the world, and being that we're in June, being that we just got a brand new UFC 320 fight card announcement going down in Las Vegas on October 4th, will this be one of, if not the headlining bout title fights of that pay-per-view card in Vegas? I wouldn't complain, I'll tell you that right now, because I don't foresee them making this fight in New York City. Maybe they could. After all, Merab does train with the Serra-Longo gym out of New York. Or will we see it at the end of the year card in December? I think that October card is calling both of their names. Is that the fight that you want to see in the aftermath of UFC 316? Merab Dvalishvili versus Corey Sandhagen for the Bantamweight Championship of the world? Let me know down in the comments below. And obviously one of the big talking points after UFC 316 is for the loser here in Sean O'Malley as well. And that is because 1, he's one of the biggest names in all of the UFC today, and 2, he's now 0-2 to the current sitting champion in the 135-pound weight class, and 3, he's already talked about featherweight in his past. Is that the next move for the former bantamweight champion Sean O'Malley, or will he look to maybe make one more run at the bantamweight title? Problem for him is, if Merab keeps on winning, he just goes further down the totem pole, being that he's already lost 2 fights to him. So let's just say that Sean wants to stay at 135. Let's just say that Merab keeps steamrolling through every single person the UFC puts in front of him. Sean O'Malley's going to have to win, what, 2-3 fights in a row minimum to potentially get a trilogy fight? And is that something that a big name like Sean O'Malley will want to do? I think that's a really tough question, and that's something that I would love to hear the UFC discuss in the War Room come Tuesday. I will say that if Corey Sandhagen is the next man up for Merab's title, then maybe we get a rematch between Sean and Petr Yan. They had a very close fight years ago. Maybe we see Sean O'Malley coming off of a loss to Merab take on Umar Nurmagomedov coming off of a loss to Merab. Do we see him take on someone like a Song Yadong or a Deiveson Figueiredo? I just don't necessarily see that happening, but crazier things have happened, and I guess if it's none of those options, will we see Sean O'Malley move up to 145 pounds? He's definitely big enough, he's long and tall enough to compete in the featherweight division in my opinion. I know Aljamain Sterling is out there saying now that he's in the featherweight division, he would love to run that fight back with Sean O'Malley at 100% health and in a new weight class, so that's a potential intriguing matchup for 145 for Sean O'Malley. But I do think it's a very hard question to answer. I don't think it's that clear of a path. I think there's many different options that we as the MMA community can openly discuss as potential next up for Sean O'Malley. So I want to hear what you think. down below. And now that we are done with the UFC 316 main event title fight, let's jump into the UFC 316 co-main event title fight where Kayla Harrison maybe just cemented herself as the greatest combat sports athlete of all time. And why do I say that? That's because Kayla Harrison is now a two-time Olympic gold medalist in judo. She's a two-time lightweight PFL tournament winner and champion, and she is now a 135-pound bantamweight UFC champion of the world, 2 Olympic gold medals, 3 MMA world championships across 2 different weight classes and 2 separate promotions. Come on, man. It's not that out of the realm of possibility to say the greatest combat sports athlete of all time is none other than the Queen, Kayla Harrison. And am I a little bit biased being that I'm from Ohio? Being that Kayla Harrison is from Ohio? You bet your ass I am. But that's okay because she's backing it up in the cage. She is now 3-0 since jumping over to the UFC last April at UFC 300, and in just 14 months' time, she has become the bantamweight champion of the world. The OG women's weight class for the UFC now has another name in their title lineage, and she did that by dominating the champion, two-time champion, should I say, Julianna Pena, and finishing her with 5 seconds to go in round number 2 with a nasty Kimura submission. Kayla is 34 years old, right in those prime years, 19-1 overall with 14 finishes to her name, and that lone loss on her record came in her attempt to become a 3-time PFL champion in a fight with Larissa Pacheco in November of 2022, where Larissa would get the decision win and shock the world. But now Kayla is firing back on all cylinders and down a weight class, well, 2 weight classes technically, at 135 pounds. Somehow, some way, she puts herself in the right mental capacity and puts her body through the ringer to sacrifice herself down to this weight class, and she is proving to be successful, and I'm not sure how much longer that she can do this with her body, but while she is the greatest bantamweight on the earth today. But that's because the other greatest bantamweight of all time wasn't necessarily active until UFC 316, because the GOAT, Amanda Nunes, the greatest female mixed martial artist of all time, is back, and she is ready to challenge Kayla Harrison, former friends. Well, I shouldn't say former, they did hug after all in the cage. But former training partners and teammates at American Top Team, that story will now come full circle. 2 women that used to help each other train to get ready to win championship fights. For Kayla, she was alongside Amanda as she was running through the UFC featherweight and bantamweight division. For Amanda, she was alongside Kayla when she was running through the PFL lightweight tournament. They parted ways, right? Amanda Nunes even said in the aftermath of UFC 316 that Kayla Harrison was the leading force in her decision to leave American Top Team and separate to create her own gym and her own coaching staff. Kayla, of course, stayed with American Top Team, is a captain for their gym down there in Coconut Creek, Florida, and now the two will look to collide for arguably the biggest female mixed martial arts fight of all time, and I think it's going to happen at the December UFC card at the end of 2025. And I have to say this right here, right now. Listen to the potential world that we are living in as MMA fans, and for the importance and significance that women's mixed martial arts could see throughout the remainder of 2025, because it is very, very much possible that before the end of the year, and I hope to be even on the same night, we could see the 2 biggest female mixed martial arts fights that the UFC has ever put on. Number 1 being Kayla Harrison, the new bantamweight champion, the former PFL 2-time champion, the former Olympic gold medalist 2 times over in judo, versus Amanda Nunes, the former 2-time bantamweight champion, the former featherweight champion, the former champ simultaneous with title defenses in both weight classes at the same time, coming out of retirement, looking to become a 4-time UFC world champion. In order to do so, she will have to beat the phenom that is Kayla Harrison. And in the same breath, we could also see the 2-time flyweight champion of the world, Valentina Shevchenko, take on the 2-time strawweight champion, Zhang Weili, in a super fight at 125 pounds. Come on, man. If you're the UFC, if I'm the UFC, if I'm in there Tuesday afternoon, morning, night, whenever they're in the war room in the UFC headquarters, that's the idea I'm pitching. At the end of the year, on that December pay-per-view card, you main event it with Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison. You co-main event it with Valentina Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili. The biggest night in women's mixed martial arts history. UFC, that is what you have to do. That's the play. Can you imagine the build-up to those two massive title fights and the significance and importance that would hold for women's mixed martial arts in its current state and pressing it forward into the future? Four of the biggest names ever in the history of the sport, all competing on the same night, all competing for gold to be wrapped around their waist with all of the legacy on the line for every single one of them. That is absolutely massive, and it would be a historic night for the sport, for women's MMA, and for the organization itself, the UFC. And again, just for me to ride on the coattails of Kayla Harrison once more, I can't express enough the story behind Kayla Harrison and how she got to where she is today with that UFC belt wrapped around her waist, a survivor and advocate for sexual assault, especially for youth, a survivor and advocate for people battling mental health and depression issues and pulling herself out of that, to become a two-time Olympic gold medalist, to become a two-time PFL champion, to become a UFC champion 20 pounds less than her original competing weight in the PFL. You cannot hate on this woman. Not to mention, I almost forgot that she is now a mother to her niece and nephew. She adopted them from her sister after her family was battling through some very dark times. There's no way that you can dislike someone like Kayla Harrison for standing strong in her faith and being an advocate for so many avenues of people that have struggled in different paths of life. And she is at the top of the sport. She's at the top of the mountain and now finds herself on the verge of one of the, if not the biggest, women's mixed martial arts fights of all time against the greatest of all time, Amanda Nunes. UFC 316 was a huge night and a very successful, lucrative night, if I had to guess, for the UFC. And look at all of the things to do in the aftermath of just the two championship fights at the top of the bill. What an amazing, memorable night that it was. And I think moving forward, this could be a very important night in the history of the UFC based upon what could come in the aftermath of this card. With all of the stakes and legacy for the champion Merab Dvalishvili at bantamweight, for the stakes and legacy on the line between Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes, and with that fight being made, what it could potentially also push the UFC to book in terms of Valentina versus Zhang Weili in another super fight. Man, I am ready to go after UFC 316. I want to hear all of your thoughts on these two title fights down below. I know I already asked about the main event, but now I want to ask here for the co-main event. Do you agree with me? Do you want to see that massive doubleheader with the two championship women's fights? Do you want to see Amanda Nunes come out of retirement to face Kayla Harrison? Because, come on, guys, if she doesn't, there's literally no one else for Kayla to fight right now at bantamweight. I want to hear all of your takeaways from this performance from Kayla, how much longer you think she can do this successfully at 135 pounds, and everything else in between. That's it for the UFC 316 title fight recap, and I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, as we continue to press toward reaching the goal of 1,000 subscribers in 2025. Alongside recaps of the most meaningful results from each card, I also break down and preview the biggest fights heading into each weekend, talking about the best storylines and what is at stake, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the discussion and the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA. And if you enjoy listening to full-length podcast episodes, you can follow on Spotify, Apple, and more, as every Monday and Friday episodes release there. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.